Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Morin. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on what we're doing on a pure product overview of our IO reduction software that guarantees 2x faster SQL performance. My name is Brian Morin. I'm the SVP of Sales and Marketing here at Conducive Technologies. And with me is a guy who's been here at the company for just a couple years now, isn't it, GQ? We call him GQ. His name is Jerry Kwan. He's our SVP of Technology Strategy. How are you doing, GQ?
Hey, I'm doing good, Brian, and don't let Brian fool you. You know, although he's a marketing guy, he has a lot of tech there, but I'm here to bring the real tech to you.
GQ, keep me on the straight and narrow. Just so that our audience knows who are all dialing in at the moment, let me just set the table here a little bit. This isn't just a product overview. What we're doing is giving you first a little bit of some thought leadership in understanding, why and how is there so much excessive, noisy, unnecessary I/O that's dampening performance. GQ really the big thing, at least from an education curve, that our audience may not be aware of, is that on any given system, what we have found is there is at a absolute minimum about 30 to 40% I/O traffic that is just noisy I/O, it's just unnecessary I/O. Essentially an I/O tax that is dampening and stealing performance. That's what our software solves. So just to give you just a little bit of a high level, what is it that the software actually is, and then let's dig in under the hood to talk about what are some of these problems that we're actually solving. And just so you know, everyone who is attending today's webinar, we will be giving you a free NFR, a not-for-resale version of our software. It's a perpetual license that as soon as the webinar is over, you can download that license. You can install that software onto any SQL Server instance that you have running and see exactly what we're talking about, because the proof is in the pudding. The software itself is just, it's very, very simple. Really, at the end of the day, it's just a simple software utility. It's just a set and forget software. You install it right onto your Windows server running your SQL Server instance. You install the software, you simply reboot, and then the software is active. It's working quietly in the background, running with near zero overhead. We challenge you to even see the CPU footprint, just a very thin filter driver. And what it's doing is it's offloading I/O from your underlying storage and then streamlining whatever I/O traffic remains, so that your SQL Server is achieving at least 2x faster performance gains. So it's a perfect approach for those organizations that find themselves I/O bound. They would like to get more performance, but they just perhaps at the moment don't have the CapEx budget to throw more expensive, flash hardware at the problem, and just completely non-disruptively they can install our software and see those gains. So you may just wonder, well, who are we and what expertise do we have in this space to even be speaking to the topic? So this is not a slide that we'll spend more than a minute on, but it's just to give you a little bit of the background of who's speaking here. The company itself is a 35-year-old company. We're the 12th oldest software company in the world. If you haven't heard of us, you certainly have heard of all of our OEM partners, Dell, Lenovo, HP, SanDisk, Western Digital, Samsung, just to name a few. The company itself was actually formerly known as Diskkeeper, known for years and years as the #1 defrag utility for Windows systems. But about 5 years ago, the company made a huge leap forward with its IP and brought to market I/O reduction software that would solve performance issues, particularly in virtual environments. And since its launch, Gartner named the company Cool Vendor of the Year, Storage Magazine named Storage Software Product of the Year. And since that launch, we're now in our 6th generation. We now have over 2,500 mid-market large enterprises running our software across their environment, speeding not just their SQL Server instances. That is the #1 reason why customers come to us, but our software can be used on other I/O-intensive applications. So that just gives you a little bit of background of who we are, close relationships with both Microsoft and VMware. In fact, GQ, last month we were notably named the first ever software vendor certified by Microsoft for their SQL I/O reliability program.
And I like to consider this a very elite certification. Microsoft has these certain levels to meet to get this type of certification. And there's very limited people on there. We're in good companies with people like EMC, Dell, and HP here. So it's a really good indication of the level that we are working at, Brian.
Now, just a market data slide to share with our audience, just so that they know that they're not alone in this. We conducted what we believe is the largest independent survey or study that was done on I/O performance earlier in the year. And we asked this question: how many of you, that are running applications on SQL, how many of you are experiencing staff or customer complaints due to sluggish performance, that it's so slow and certain queries or reports are giving you so much problems, you're actually getting complaints about it? And 27% of those organizations said that's me. So if you're here and you're I/O bound and experiencing some sluggish SQL performance, we're just letting you know you're not alone. There's a large part of the market who sits there with you. And when we first brought our technology to the marketplace, I guess almost 5 years ago, we marketed the product, just horizontally across all applications. But over the years, what we found is that 7 of 10 new customers that come to us, to buy our software to boost an application performance, 7 out of 10 times has to do with SQL. One of the reasons, not just because it's so I/O intensive, but there's some inherent inefficiencies to SQL that cause that application to run much slower than it should. So you can see there that when we asked the question to our audience earlier in the year, what is the most intensive application that you're supporting? As you can see, SQL just jumps right off the page. That's the number of answers represented by the size of the application. So let's go ahead and start just by giving you a picture of what a healthy I/O stream looks like. I told you we're going to give you just a very quick education on what are these issues that are occurring under the hood that rob performance, and it actually has to do with what we call I/O degradation, where your I/O characteristics break down to be excessively small or more fractured, more random than they really need to be, and that severely dampens performance. Now, if we were to take an abstraction of what your I/O stream should look like, you can see in front of you, this is what a healthy I/O stream should look like. You're getting a nice, healthy relationship between I/O and data. You're getting nice, large, clean, contiguous writes. You can see the sequential nature of your traffic. But the moment that you virtualize and you're running SQL Server and you're running that on a Windows operating system, that is not the I/O stream that you get. So the I/O stream that you get is something that looks more like this. You have 2 big taxes under that hood that are robbing that performance. So as great as virtualization has been for server efficiency, there has been one downside, and it adds complexity to the data path, a la the I/O blender effect. We work with Gartner to coin that term. It's when all the disparate VMs that are sitting on the same host hypervisor, they mix and randomize those I/O streams from the disparate VMs before sending down the storage, very random pattern. And GQ, most organizations, they don't say this performance penalty as severely as they otherwise would, because they usually virtualize very slowly from physical to virtual, so they don't necessarily see the performance impact manifest in front of them. But those organizations who flip the switch and go from 100% virtual to 100% physical over 100% physical to 100% virtual, they really see it. In GQ, you worked with a hospital that did exactly that. In fact, one of the largest healthcare organizations in the U.S., I believe GQ, they virtualized 2,000 or so servers overnight. In GQ, what did they see?
You're right, Brian. They virtualized 2,500 systems. And, most people think, oh, I'm going to go physical, virtual, I'll get the same performance. Well, they didn't, Brian. And the big bottleneck was their I/O. And when they saw that, they said, oh, we got to figure this out. We got to solve it. And they were looking at buying $2 million of all-flash array to solve the problem. Well, they put our software in there, and that solved the issue. They got back their I/O performance, and they were able to save that $2 million purchase. So they're very happy with our product right there, Brian.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, This I/O blender effect, once you virtualize it, it's not the only performance penalty that's occurring. There's actually a even worse performance penalty that's occurring at the very top of the stack, and that's the I/O that's coming out of the Windows operating system. Windows just does not play well in a virtual environment. It doesn't play well in any environment where it's abstracted from the physical layer. And as a result, Windows ends up taking any given write and breaks it down to be much smaller than it really needs to be. So as a result, you end up with all this really small, tiny, fractured writes and reads that are also then subsequently getting mixed and randomized by the I/O blender effect. And you may wonder, well, does the storage media matter on dealing with this kind of performance penalty? And GQ, another good example is a recent case study we did with the University of Illinois. They just had they were running all flash systems, supporting their hardest hitting application on their campus, both an Oracle application and a SQL application, and they had no idea the dampening they were getting from this. Although things were running fine for a year, things began to slow down. They were looking at adding more all-flash arrays to get more IOPS. They tried our software, and after trying our software, we more than doubled performance. And it just has to do with the fact that they didn't realize that there's all this I/O, all this really unnecessary I/O that chews up your IOPS, it dampens your performance, and it's akin to importing molasses on your systems. Everything is running, it's just running much slower than it should, and you're not getting near the throughput that you should. So we're going to get and explain. You ask, well, what is it that Windows is doing? How come Windows is breaking down these files to be much excessively smaller than they need to be? And I'm going to tee up the tech guy here in just a second to address that. So the slide in front of you is just an overview of what our software is. We're actually doing two things to solve the problem that you saw on the prior slide. We have two different patented engines. One engine is a write optimization engine, one is a read optimization engine, and as I mentioned, this software is just set and forget software. You install it on a Windows server, you reboot, and it's running quietly in the background with near zero overhead, optimizing your I/O stream and optimizing your performance. In GQ, this first engine, this is a write optimization engine, and it solves that problem from Windows that breaks writes down to be excessively smaller than they really need to be. And GQ, maybe you could just tee up for our audience and explain for a little, just 2 minutes, what's actually happening, because in this case, Windows, at least at the logical disk layer outside the SAN, it's only ever looking for the next available space. It's never looking for the right size. And as a result, the next available space is never the right size.
Be glad to, Brian, but let me just say one thing to our attendees there. There's a Q&A box over there, and if you have any questions, please feel free to write your questions there, and we'll get to them either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. This write I/O reduction here, it's because Windows tries to do a one-size-fits-all approach, the file system. Because when a file gets created or extended, the Windows system doesn't know how big that's going to be. So it goes and finds the next fixed allocation. Well, if that file is bigger than that, it has to go find another allocation. And this is all on the logical level on the Windows OS system. And when it does have to go get that next allocation, well, that's another I/O. And it gets bigger than that and has to find another I/O. Well, what we do is we know, by monitoring the system in the background, we know when files get created or extended how big they're going to be. So we just feed that intelligence back to the file system. So when a file gets created or extended, it finds the best allocation. So now it's a nice single I/O. And what you might think about, it's a nice analogy, if you're going to bring one piece of data from one place to another, or a gallon of water from one place to another, wouldn't you like to do it in one big gallon container rather than a whole bunch of Dixie cups? And that's what we're doing. We're allowing the file system to be smart in its allocation. So now you get these nice big sequential I/O. And if you ever look at storage performance, they always give two types of benchmarks. One, random I/O, and to sequential I/O. And the sequential I/O always outperformed the random I/O. And that's what we're enforcing here, for the system to deliver nice sequential I/O, Brian.
Yep. You guys should point out to our audience, for those that may you just be concerned about running the software itself, you'll keep in mind that we're now in our 6th generation. We have over 2,500 customers, mid-market, large enterprise. We have a good footprint in the Fortune 500. This is battle-tested technology, and it's currently being used in tens of thousands of across tens of thousands of systems. Now, GQ, over here, that's not the only thing that we're doing. We actually have a read optimization engine. Now, this one is very, very different from the first engine. The first one is optimizing writes. This one is optimizing reads. Now, this is something you may not know about our company, but if you are a Gartner client, you can talk to them. Gartner considers us the world leader in DRAM read caching technology. We can't say we know that for sure, but we believe we've sold more DRAM caching licenses over the years than any other player. And what is really unique about our caching engine is that we're just monitoring the available memory on any given server, and we're finding and determining any memory that's sitting idle, that's otherwise just sitting there wasted and not being put to use. We're putting it to use to serve hot reads. So what that means is that the engine is completely dynamic. If your system is memory constrained, or the application or OS is asking for all the memory, well then our engine backs off completely. But if there's even just a little bit of DRAM sitting there, we're going to take that and we're going to put that to good use. And GQ, maybe you can explain, we've had OEM partners that could have used Intel's caching for free, but opted to pay to use ours, and it's because we're very intelligent in how we cache.
You're right, Brian. Caching's not new, but what to put in cache and keep in cache for optimal performance, that's where we come in. And you're right, 9 out of the top 10 OEM manufacturers actually license our technology, as well as SanDisk and Western Digital. Now, where this really comes into play on the SQL environment is that's where we really shine, Brian.
Yeah, right.
SQL actually has caching, but it does a very poor job. What it tends to do, it tends to take all the memory and just say, hey, let me load my databases in there. And a lot of those databases aren't even getting access. So it's it's not very smart in how it's using those resources. If what we have recommended to customers is, hey, limit the amount of memory that SQL is using, give us just a little bit, 4 gigabytes, 2 gigabytes, and you'll see us reduce anywhere from 30, 40, 50%. We've seen upwards to 300% I/O reduction from the way we're using. And that's because we're very smart on what to put in cache and keep in cache. Not only, we're not only looking for cache hit rates, but we're looking at what data to put in there for the best performance gains. So it's not the large I/Os to put in there, it's those small random I/Os to put in the cache and get rid of those. So by doing that, we satisfy that I/O right there at the operating system, so it doesn't even have to go to storage to satisfy those I/Os, Brian. And that's what's unique about our technology.
And as mentioned, the proof is in the pudding, so right after the webinar is over, you will be receiving your NFR. You can install and try yourself and see exactly what we're talking about. Now, just to give you some real-world examples from customers, just on how it's helped other customers. I'm not going to share all of these that are on this slide. I'll just call out just a couple. You can go to our website. We have over 20 case studies published on our website. All of them cite at least a minimum of doubling in performance of their SQL servers. A good example is ASL Marketing. They had a SQL batch import job. It would take 27 hours. They didn't have it in budget to go buy a new SAN to do that forklift upgrade. To lower that time, they installed our software, and they just couldn't believe it. It dropped from 27 hours to 12 hours. Again, they just had no idea those I/O taxes under the hood that were stealing their performance. Stockport College, another one. They actually crashed on enrollment day. The I/O demand just overwhelmed their systems. On average, it took 15 minutes to process one student record. Another situation, they just didn't have it in budget to upgrade their back-end storage. I/O had outpaced the useful life a lot quicker than they expected. They tried our software. We dropped that 5 minutes down to 5 minutes, or that 15 minutes to 5 minutes, and then they said, well, we have a payroll report that's taking us an hour and a half. Maybe our software can help them there. They installed our software, and even I couldn't believe this one. They dropped it from an hour and a half to 10 minutes. So sometimes you just have no idea what's happening under the hood from an I/O degradation standpoint that's really stressing those systems, causing queue depths to pile up, and causing you to run your workloads much slower than you should. Now, this is just a slide. You could just peruse these, just taking a quick look at them. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are our most recent customer examples on some recent sales that just haven't made it into case study form. Well, actually, University of Illinois just did. I talked about them, how you can see the before and after gains there, and they were already running all flash arrays as it was. Albernia University, all their students were accessing an LMS system that sat on SQL. Students were timing out while taking tests. They just didn't have it in budget to go do a big forklift upgrade. They installed our software, and all of that completely went away. And maybe one more here, Admiral Metals. Their users were experiencing a lag under peak load when their in-house app that sat on SQL would query metal prices. We doubled their SQL performance, and then all lag disappeared. So you can imagine how satisfied that can be for a customer that would otherwise think they'd have to do a big forklift upgrade. Now, GQ, our software, as much as some customers, when they install our software, they might do their own independent examination of performance by looking at their storage UI. We see some customers time queries or reports or batch jobs before and after, but the GQ, the software itself, is actually fully transparent to the type of benefit that the software is actually giving, and we call it our time save dashboard. And GQ, maybe you could just point out on what a prospective customer will see when they pull up our dashboard, and what does it mean?
And what's nice about this, Brian, is it actually shows what they're getting on their system here. For instance, on this one here, you can see the number of write IOs eliminated and the read IOs eliminated. In this case, 50% of the read IOs and 30% of the write IOs. And then the total IOs, in this case, in the last 2 weeks, over 12 million IOs were eliminated total. Now, a lot of people think, okay, that's nice, but what does that actually save me? Well, we actually know how long these IOs would have taken because we're measuring that we're a file system filter driver. So we can see how long those IOs would have taken. So we can take that and actually show how much storage IO time is actually saved on your system. In this case, we saved over 5 hours of IO time in those last 2 weeks, Brian, that this software was installed on.
Yep. Now, for those that are going to be installing this on a SQL server, there is some best practice that you do want to follow. How can you guarantee a 2x faster SQL experience? Well, step one is if you happen to think that you are memory constrained and perhaps you may be getting a bottleneck in there, the very first thing that we would say is if you can, try to beef up memory server side if you feel that your memory is constrained. There will be some customers that will beef up their memory server side. They'll keep the existing amount that their SQL server's already been using, but then add a little bit more memory and commit that. So that way, when they cap SQL, there's going to be extra memory left over for us to be using. Now, step two is to make sure that you cap your SQL memory usage. Now, whenever we speak with most administrators, we see that most follow the Microsoft best practice of capping SQL, leaving at least 4 gig for the Microsoft operating system. What we encourage you to do is to cap that a little more aggressively at a minimum, cap that leaving at least 8 gig left over. So that way, our software will see not the amount of memory that the OS is not using, and we'll be able to put that into our intelligent cache and help deliver extra gains. If you have a larger amount of memory that are sitting there, and you're talking about a really big database and a really heavy workload, and you already have a lot of memory on that system, then you may want to follow our best practice of capping SQL at about 70% of physical memory. And our cache can leverage up to 128 gig of RAM per system. And some of our customers, they do take advantage of that. They've really bought into this tier 0 caching strategy. And what they're doing is they're committing as much memory as they can for our software to use. And we see them, GQ, oftentimes get into the 90% plus cache hit rate, and that's how you get into those otherworldly gains, because DRAM is 15 times faster than even an SSD. And then lastly, just as GQ mentioned, step 3, after you install the software, let it run for a few days, allow our algorithms to adjust, and then after a few days, pull up our dashboard. You're looking for that kind of that 50% mark, of having 50% of your I/O traffic offloaded. Once you hit that 50% mark, that indicates that you have everything properly tuned. You are getting into that 2x or plus performance gains to your users, unless you're barring any delivery issues. And if for any reason you see that you're really under that 50% threshold, well then consider beefing up, adding a little bit more memory, capping SQL a little bit more aggressively, giving a little more software to us, and we will get you into those gains. So as next step, we're going to close out and we're going to go to a full Q&A here at the bottom of the hour. I know that we have had some questions that have come in, and we'll throw those at GQ, and we'll play the game to see if anyone can stump the engineer here. But as far as next step, what do we want you to do? Well, you're going to get a download link. You can download and install the NFR, and then as you mentioned, after a few days, pull up the dashboard and see what the software is actually doing for you. Now, if you want to do something a little bit broader, and what we would call more of a real POC, you'll just want to let your account manager know over email that you are interested in doing a 30-day trial across all the VMs on the same host. As much as you can install and run our software on one SQL instance, keep in mind, you're still not going to see the full power of what our software can do, because those other systems sitting on that same host hypervisor are creating chatty I/O issues and competing for some of those IOPS and resources that your SQL server needs. So the only time that you're really going to see the full benefit of what the software can do is when you're running the software on all the instances, all the guest machines sitting on the same host hypervisor. So if you want to do what we'd call a real POC, let your account manager know. We'll give you access to a 30-day trial. And if you even want to spin up our centralized management console, our SE will walk you through that. It takes no more than 20 minutes to stand up our centralized management console, and you can push to all the VMs on as many as you want, all at once, and do that very, very quickly. So GQ, with that, I know we have some questions that have come in, and I know we have some that need to drop off here at the bottom of the hour, but I'm just going to ask you, did I miss anything, or are you ready to go into Q&A?
No, there's a few things I want to reiterate because I see it on the questions, but that you went over already. But I think we'll go around the questions. There's some good ones out there, and I like it.
Okay, good. Well, GQ, I'll go ahead and throw one at you right here. Tim it says, you kind of heard what we're doing with the write optimization, and he's wondering, this sounds like buffering, and Tim, you're right, it does sound like buffering. And I think the concern is, well, if you're buffering, is there kind of any latency involved in what we're doing? So GQ, maybe you can clarify that. We're not doing any buffering. There isn't any latency involved. Maybe you can help our audience understand that just a little bit better.
And you're right, Tim. A lot of people think, how do we make these writes contiguous? You must be buffering all these writes together and then sending them out. Actually, it's much simpler than that, Tim. We are not buffering because that would take overhead. We're actually just giving intelligence to the file system so it can do a better job when it's writing out the data, rather than it, as I said, it's not very smart on knowing how big a file is going to create it, so it doesn't look for the best allocation. We allow it to know when a file gets created or extend how big it's going to be, so it can find the best allocation, so it can write it out all in one time. So it's a very simple approach. We're just giving the Windows file systems the intelligence so it can do a better job. Simple as that.
Yep.
But I also see that Tim asking, and this is the one thing that you reiterated, Brian, about how much RAM is needed here. And actually, Brian indicated on, limiting the amount of RAM that SQL is using and to give us some to use. But as Brian indicated, we use this memory very dynamically. We're only going to use RAM that is available to the system. And we'll use that for the caching to give you the performance benefits. But if any user or system needs that RAM, we automatically and dynamically give it up because they have first priority. So we never cause any memory contention issues, okay? So we're only using what's available on the system.
Yep. Now, GQ, Michael asks, how about physical systems? Do some of our customers run our software on physical servers?
And yes, and I like that question because I know we talked about the virtual environment here, but the same I/O bottleneck also affects the physical systems. And
we see it exaggerated on the virtual side of the house, but yes, we do have lots of customers that run it on their physical systems, absolutely.
Yes. And that same I/O bottleneck, Brian, it happens there and also on SANs, where you have a whole bunch of physical systems and virtual systems attacking that same SANs with different LUNs. You still get that same I/O blender effect, and that's what we solved.
Yep. Yep. And GQ, question from Brett, is this supported with Citrix Zen Server?
Yes. In fact, we have many cases where we're working great on the Citrix Zen servers. So I like to say definitely yes.
Right. Now, there is a question here about Linux. Can we help with Linux? And at this time, we only have a version to optimize your systems that are running the Windows operating system.
But, Brian, we're getting more and more questions on the Linux, so we're taking a look at that too now.
Yep. And GQ, Victor has a question here. He goes, is your application, is it doing defragmentation of a SQL file and then placing it as a single piece on the hard drive?
We actually do that too, as well as, reducing the I/O. We also do the defragmentation of the SQL file itself. Not internally, but if the SQL file is broken up and we see that it's causing performance degradation, we will then defragment it too, Brian, as well, because we want to do everything we can to get that performance gain back to the user.
Now, Derek has a question here. He mentions that his software is client-based, where we're talking about Windows running on a VM, and he's wondering, hey, do we have a solution for clients? And Derek, funny that you mentioned that because we do. In fact, some of the some of the largest organizations in the world that are using the client version of our software on across their fleet of PCs. And in that case, they're using DiskKeeper for those with hard disk drives. They're using our SSD Keeper product. This idea that there's 30 to 40% of I/O that's completely unnecessary, just noisy I/O. That's not just true of a server. It's also true on a PC. There's some organizations that use the client version of our software on all their PCs. There's some organizations that use it only on their hardest hitting PCs, those used by developers or AutoCAD, that are really maxing out the performance of their systems. Now, GQ, Jason has a question. Listen, you mentioned defragmentation, but does this work with flash storage as well? And I think maybe that's something that you should clarify from the last statement. How our software plays with flash storage.
And we play fine on flash storage. A lot of people think, oh, I don't need your software because I have an all-flash array. Well, actually, these problems, these bottleneck issues, they all occur on the Windows operating side. And what you're getting is, you know, these effects that Brian indicated, the I/O blender effect, that's before it hits storage. So what we're doing is we're cleaning up the I/O, so now the storage can do a better job of it.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, GQ, go ahead.
No, what we're doing is we're getting the optimal performance that you paid for on your storage that you can get.
Yeah, and what you really want to think of it is that those customers of ours that have their SQL systems properly tuned, we find that we're offloading about 50% of I/O from going down to the underlying storage. So you can see that it has nothing to do with the actual storage media on the back end. It has to do with all the noisy, unnecessary I/O that's chewing up performance. So if we're offloading 50% of your I/O traffic, that's going to have the same performance impact to a hybrid array as it is to an all-flash array. You're simply going to be dealing with less I/O demand hitting that underlying storage system.
And
all right, well, GQ. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
I'm just
Brian.
trying to scan through. I don't know that I see any more questions here, GQ, that need to be addressed.
No, these were good questions. I like it. Oh, I have one from Tim again. How's dirty reading and writing handled? You know, we're actually just a read cache here, so we're not doing, you know, write caching here. We're just doing read caching here. So if, you know, any write comes in, of course, we will update our read cache, but in case the read cache is very safe. So whatever data that is in our read cache is already on the storage itself.
And last question I see from Jason, is this good with both for OLTP and OLAP applications? Yes, it absolutely is. At the end of the day, our software is agnostic to the application. You know, a Windows I/O is a Windows I/O. And what we're doing is we're eliminating that I/O degradation, adding intelligence to the Windows operating system, helping it choose the best allocation instead of the next available allocation. So that way you're getting nice, large, clean, contiguous writes and reads, and then, of course, what we're doing on the read caching side. So, GQ, it looks like that's all the questions we had come in. If for any reason we didn't get to your question, you will be getting an email from your Conducive account manager that does have a download link. If you have any questions at that time or like to have a quick call with them and the rest of your team, if you'd like us to bring one of our SCs for that conversation, we're more than happy to facilitate that. And as I mentioned, if you are wanting to do a broader test, if you'd like to take a 30-day version of our software, put it on all the VMs on a particular host or maybe a cluster of multiple hosts that you're running, we can get you connected with that and make that quick, painless, and easy process for you. So you just let us know what you want to do, and we're happy to assist. So, GQ, any final remarks from your end?
No, I just see one more question, Brian. These are questions. Does it work with MySQL or does it support all SQL subversions? Yes, it does. We work on Windows OSs from 2008 R2 and to the latest version here, as well as Windows 7 to the Windows 10 here, Brian. Otherwise,
good.
Just want to thank everyone for joining us, and I like the interaction that they provided. It was great.
Yep, we look forward to hearing your results from using the software. We'd like to thank you for attending. Have a good day.